I'm your last speaker for this afternoon, and thank you again for coming. We've been talking about the breadth of IBC. We've said a lot of good things about IBC and the virtues of dividend-paying whole life insurance, but there's also a depth that I want to make sure that you get before you leave here this afternoon. The most conventional way that I've heard individuals and financial professionals refer to Nelson Nash's infinite banking concept, or I should say the infrastructure, the platform for the infinite banking concept, is to refer to it as one's own private bank. Now, really, it's not a bank in the conventional sense of the word, but in a way, it is a form of privatized banking or a banking system. There is another way that I've heard financial professionals describe the infrastructure that's used for IBC. And here, they refer to it as the perfect investment. And in this scenario, they will ask an individual to design their perfect investment. They just say, if you had the ability to design the perfect investment, what would you put in it? Now, the list of things that they mention vary from individual to individual, but there's a list of them that you see repeated almost every single time. And I'd like to put those out for you to see. The very first one they hit us with is they all want a high rate of return on the investment. And they also say they want it to be consistent. Now, this is one that I would pick myself. If I'm going to design my ideal investment, I want it to have a high rate of return, and I want it to be consistent. Another thing that they mention is that they want it to be liquid. What they mean by that a lot of times is that if they get into the investment and they don't really like it, they want an escape exit out of it as quickly as possible. So they say, I want it to be liquid. Now, Bob also mentioned liquidity can mean turn it to cash. Another thing they mention is guarantees. Well, they know that we live in a world where there's no such things as guarantees, but since we're designing a perfect investment, I would like my investment to have guarantees. So this is one that comes up on the list quite often. They want it to be safe. And yes, they want tax benefits. They all say they want tax benefits on their investment. And since it's a perfect investment, why not tax-free? And I agree with them. They do not want market volatility. That's almost unanimous. They want creditor protection on their perfect investment. If you are driving and you kill someone on the road, you know there's going to be an attorney that's going to come after your assets. And so you want your perfect investment to be shielded from creditors, even in bankruptcy. Creditor protection. Of course, they want it to be inflation-proof. We all know that we live in a world of chronic inflation. The cost of living just seems to continue to go up every single year. So we would like our perfect investment to be inflation-proof. They say that they want control of the asset. It seems to them and to me and all of you, I'm sure, that everyone seems to control our asset except us. So in our perfect investment, we'd like to control it. They want it to be transferable, and here they mean to the next generation without any hitches. They want it to be easy to manage. Now here again, we live in a world in which everyone else seems to be managing our investments and our assets. And sometimes we think they're not doing such a hot job, and we think we can do a better job. So if we can manage it, we want it to be easy to manage. Most people realize that there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's a cost to everything. But if there's going to be a cost, of course, they would like for that cost to be as low as possible. So they want low fees and absolutely no penalties. That's what they want for their perfect investment. Now, at this point down the list, they're starting to realize that maybe this thing they're designing is probably illegal. So they don't want an illegal investment. They want it to be legal, and they want it to be reputable. So this is what they mean. They want a reputable legal investment. And they want it to be private. Now, here what they're saying is that they don't want the IRS looking over their shoulder on this and sending them a 1099 every time they turn around. Now, I'm sure you can think of other things that you would put here on this list if you were building your own perfect investment. But honestly, looking at the list, wouldn't you say that this is just too good to be true? It's just too good to be true. When you tell these individuals that this is dividend-paying whole life, they are stunned. What? I've always heard this is the worst place to put your money. But it's true. It is absolutely true. Now, agreed, there are some investments and assets that they have their virtues, but they're very weak in others. With dividend-paying whole life, you get all of these. And what's really amazing, it's not even an investment. It's life insurance. Now, imagine having this infrastructure as the warehouse for all your cash, all your money. And have this instead a conventional commercial bank account, or even worse, a tax-qualified plan. When you take this infrastructure and you add Nelson Nash's insights to the IBC process and concept, you've got an amazing powerhouse here. This gentleman, Richard Russell, is a financial guru from the past, very much like a Susie Orman or a Dave Ramsey. Back in the 50s, he was a writer for Barron's, a very prominent publication, all through the 90s. He also wrote for publications that we all recognize, like Time, Newsweek, the Wall Street Journal. Well, recently, he republished an article that he said he wrote 40 years ago. And he said that this one article, out of all the articles he'd ever written, was the one the public kept saying was his best article. I'm sure you can find it on the internet. The title of it is Rich Man, Poor Man. It's a great little article. It's worth reading. To summarize it for you, in this article, Richard Russell describes the road to riches. And he says it's the power of compounding. Now, not the way to get rich quick, but the sure way to get rich. He says that the power of compounding can only work through time, or else it doesn't work at all. Now, when modern Americans hear that word time, they need to exercise a little patience. Modern Americans are very impatient when it comes to time. But in order to make the power of compounding work, you need to work with time. He says there are two catches, however, with the power of compounding, two of them. One of them, he says, that it requires sacrifice, discipline, because you can't spend and save it at the same time. And here again, most people do not have the discipline or even know how to save. But this is one of the big catches. The other one, he says, is that compounding is slow. It's slow. And not only slow, but it's also extremely boring. Now, it's slow and boring, he said, only until about maybe the 7th or 8th year, and then all of a sudden the magic starts. The money just starts to come in from all kinds of directions, it seems like. In this article, he makes us look at an example of two investors, investor A and investor B. He begins telling us about investor B, and here he's trying to prove the power of compounding, and he says that investor B opens an IRA account at age 19, an individual retirement account. Now, as we all know, that's a tax-qualified plan, mostly invested in mutual funds. But anyway, this is what this young man does at age 19. And for 7 consecutive years, he puts in $2,000 into this IRA. And he puts it in there an average of 10%. Now, keep in mind, he wrote this article 40 years ago, so this rate of interest was not that unusual back then. But then he says that after 7 years, he makes no further contributions. That's all the money he puts in. If you do a simple calculation, $2,000 every year for 7 years is just $14,000. Do you get the statistics on investor B? Let's go to investor A, which he shows us. And he says that investor A also opens up an IRA at age 26. That's 7 years later. He starts to open his when the other young man is finishing up making his contributions. 7 years later, okay? And then this young man continues faithfully to contribute $2,000 a year every year until he's an old man, age 65, at the same theoretical rate. Then Richard Russell asks us to study the results. And first he says, here's investor A. He winds up with a pile of money, $893,000 and such. Remembering he made 40 contributions, 40 consecutive contributions of $2,000. That's $80,000, isn't it? Now, sure enough, it grew into a pile of money. It's a nice, sizable pile of money. Then he shows us investor B, who only made 7 contributions, winds up with a bigger pile of money. Now see, when I first saw this, it got my attention. Wow, that's almost looks impossible. But this is exactly the results of this, and it happened only because investor B started 7 years earlier. Let's look at these two investors, these piles of money side by side. All right, David, if you'll go down and scroll a little bit down, and when you come up, now let's hit both A and B and look at the two piles. All right, stay up here at the top for just a minute. Make sure everybody focuses their eye on what we're looking at. You see investor B on the right, starting at age 19. This is in 1968. and he starts to make his contributions of $2,000 each every year. You see the year-end amount of the money and the interest that's earned. You look over on investor A, you see that he started 7 years later, that's 1975, at age 26. He starts to contribute his $2,000 every year, and you start to see the compounding growth of his money. And let's just scroll down all the way to the bottom slowly there, David, and get to the bottom line and look at the numbers we just saw a while ago. Now, look at age 65, when these two young men are looking at their IRA, and you see that investor A on the left, he has a pile of $973,000 and change. But at the bottom line, you keep in mind that he only invested $80,000, you see, so his net earnings was $893,000 and change, just the way we saw earlier. Investor B at age 65, his pile was actually a bit smaller than investor A, $944,000. But because he only invested $14,000 initially, see, his net earnings turns out to be more money. Do you see that? Now, this is Richard Russell showing us the power of compounding. A lot of folks show us the power of compounding. Most of us has probably seen it. So I have to ask you a question. Is this real life? What's wrong with this picture? Consistency. There's no such thing. Let's just scroll up to the top for just a minute. The rate of return doesn't just grow at 10% every year for anybody. You see? So let's take a look at what the stock market did for these very same years and turn on that stock market button, David, and recalculate and let the stock market come up. And before you scroll down too far, do you see that where you see green, that's when the stock market was up? Where you see red, you see that that's when the stock market was down. And so you see that the pile of money is greatly affected every time that happens. This is now starting to look more like real life, you see. Now let's just keep slowly scroll down. Let's get down over to, say, year 2000, David. Here we see 3 red lines of the stock market being down. That was the dot-com crash. Austrian economists understand these boom and bust cycles, and we go to these little points, to remind us. So that's the dot-com crash. And if we scroll down a little further, David, and look at 2008, you see the hit we took in 2008. Stock market really took a big hit then. So now if we scroll all the way to the bottom, what happened to the pile? Investor B is now down to $266,000. It's not nearly that $1 million pile he originally had. And investor A, well, he lost half of it. He has more, but he lost almost half of it. If they're looking at this at age 65, and it's in a tax qualified plan like this, and they're deciding now to take it out, does it just come out? No. What's missing? Taxes. Yeah, we got to pay taxes on this money still. Let's scroll up to the top and just take a look and see what the tax is going to do to that money before we actually get it. And turn on both of the tax buttons and recalculate and go down to the bottom and take a look and see what happened now. Investor B is now down to $169,000. This is what he actually gets once he takes the money out. Investor A gets $390,000, not the $1 million they originally had. Now, this is being taxed at the highest tax rate because that's what we have to pay. And we pay it in a lump sum, depending on how much you take out. Let's take a look at it at the medium tax rate, David, see what it looks like. Well, there it is at the 28% bracket. So investor B, is pulling out now, $200,000, and investor A will be able to pull out $465,000 after the tax. Folks, do you see how hard it is for individuals to save money? The deck is stacked against us. And we all know that if we want to retire comfortably one day, we need millions. But do you see how hard it is? Now, did you notice there's one more button up there? What button is that? Inflation. Folks, is inflation real? Yeah, it's real. Inflation has to do with the erosion of the purchasing power of our money. That's what makes it feel like things are getting more and more expensive. So we take out this money, we punch the inflation button and go down, and this is what this money really spends like once we get it out. It completely destroys this whole story that this financial guru was so famous for. They never tell you the other side of the story. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure you understand the other side of the story. Now, the interesting thing about the near perfect investment that I just showed you, now, of course, there's no such thing as a perfect investment. But if your money is inside a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy, these money eroders do not happen. You have uninterrupted compounding. So you get to experience the true power of compounding.
Carlos, what about the average fees?
Oh, that's a whole nother story.
So that's another button.
All right, let me come out of this, David. Richard Russell doesn't go into the explanations, but he does in his article warn us that there is one cardinal rule about the power of compounding. You should never break it, and that's you never lose money. If you lose money, it does not work. Now, it's important to recognize a little bit of the history of the whole life product. It goes way back, and why the infrastructure of the dividend-paying whole life policy has to be specially designed according to the way Nelson Nash describes it. And we begin to see why it is the near perfect investment. You see, prior to 1960, going back all the way to the 1800s, this is the way Americans saved money, was inside of a dividend-paying whole life policy. This is how they saved money. The other option they had was a commercial savings account at a bank, or they would buy bonds, government bonds. The stock market was a creature of the future. The average American didn't even go there. So Americans understood dividend-paying whole life. It had taken them through the Great Depression, where they saw, literally thousands of banks fail, but the life insurance sector held strong. So they believed in it. They had full confidence in it. For them, it was like cash under the mattress. That's how secure it was. But with time, we began to see some major economic changes in the United States and abroad. One of the most significant changes we saw was when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. Now, in a way, that gave central bankers around the world literally permission to print money at will. But what it has done over the period of time since 1970 is that it has emboldened the powers of central bankers. It's made them bigger, stronger. It's made governments bigger and stronger because of this constant inflation. It's caused price inflation on all commodities. And you see it most relevant in the stock markets of our country and other countries. It has changed the face of commercial banking and Wall Street, almost to criminal-like activity. And it has precipitated bigger economic booms and more drastic and longer-lasting busts. 10 years later, after 1970, if you were holding a commercial bank loan from a commercial bank, you saw the interest rate shoot up to 23%. I was caught in that. Prior to that, I was paying 4%, and I saw this dramatic effect. It seemed like it came on me overnight. And I was in pretty deep. And so this caused major problems for business owners and individuals. You heard Nelson Nash, he said he got caught in it as well. A few years later, we saw another sweeping change come across our land. That was in 1986. This was the Tax Reform Act. This was when President Ronald Reagan was in office. Now, this act was targeted to increase corporate taxes, to increase capital gains taxes, and generally just to broaden the tax code. But what it really did is that it eliminated tax shelters. That was the main emphasis that this law had effect when it came down to individuals that wanted to shield their assets and their wealth. So these tax shelters, some of you may remember, were tied to the real estate market. And so when this was eliminated, you saw a wave come across the United States of bankruptcies for businesses and individuals, all of the ones that were tied to the real estate market. So you did see the collapse of commercial and residential real estate down to the same levels that you saw during the Great Depression. A year later, we saw the setting off of Black Monday. Well, this was a stock market crash where the Dow, crash in one day, deeper than anybody had ever seen in the history of the stock market. It literally scared people to death. Wealthy individuals during this period of time started running for protection. They got a hold of their financial advisors. And I'm not talking about the local advisor, down the street or their stockbrokers. No, I'm talking about wealthy individuals, people that have money to buy good advice. They will spend it. They called up their tax attorneys up in New York and said, hey, where do we put our money now? And these guys went to work. They're getting paid well. They looked at everything that was out there, and they came back and reported it. They said, Joe, I want you to write one check. One big check and buy a single premium dividend-paying whole life policy. What? Did I hear you right? Isn't that supposed to be the worst place to put your money? No, Joe. One big check for all you got. If you want to protect your assets, buy one of these. The reason you need to is because the tax benefits in this thing, the uninterrupted compounding, the control and access to its cash values. That's why, Joe. That's why you need to do this. And I remember some newspaper headlines that some of the wealthier people that we know, I remember a couple of them for sure. I wish I had the article. One of them was Ralph Lauren. Another one was Calvin Klein. You saw them, they referred to them as big jumbo policies. You saw a big redirection of cash flows going out from wherever they had their money into the insurance sector, into one of these. Well, the IRS did step up and say, wait a minute. Now, the guys that did this, they were in already. They were already in, but the IRS said, wait, you guys are not buying life insurance here. You guys are stuffing these policies with cash and money. That's more like an investment, you see. And so they referred to them at that point, in 1998, as a modified endowment contract. If you've read Nelson Nash's book, it's right there. He talks about it. It's the MEC. Now, these policies, you buy them today, they're an automatic MEC because of this law. Now, it has not been totally eliminated. The IRS did come back and came up with a 7-pay test. What they're trying to do is to discourage individuals, from just putting one check into the policy. It's not that they said you can't do it. So now instead of writing one big check, you have to write 7 big checks. You see, that's the law, and it's perfectly legal. As I said, you can still buy the single premium dividend whole life policy, but it's an automatic MEC. So if you want to avoid it being a MEC, you have to do it under the 7-pay test now. And the point is that an IBC whole life policy is specially designed to adhere to this law. This is why it's so important that you need to speak to and talk to a financial professional that understands this, like an authorized IBC practitioner, because this is the way he's trained in our course. Today, of course, in 2015, after 44 years of what I and economists like Robert Murphy and other economists think is just bad monetary policy, it has caused Americans to just become a nation of speculators, not knowing really where to put their money. And because we now know where they can, we want to tell as many people about it as we can. The reason they're speculators now is due to the things we've been talking about. Chronic money printing, the onerous taxation we're under, the way they falsely manipulate interest rates, and of course the erratic market volatility that we're under all the time. The life insurance sector, we do need to understand, is very unique. It's just in its structure, the way it's set up, very conservative. It's underpinned by reserves, that are not as vulnerable to systemic risk. Their specialty, you have to understand, is mitigating risk. This is what they're all about. Now, prior to 1960, there were only 2 products in the life insurance sector. Term life insurance, which most of us know what that is, and the other one was dividend-paying whole life. That's all there was. It was not until 1970 that we started to see other cash value permanent life insurance, come into the industry. And these particular policies are more market sensitive. They are cash value policies, but they're more market sensitive because they were trying to compete with the Wall Street sector. That's why they were designed. Americans started moving toward Wall Street because they thought that that's where all the action was during this period of time. You see? And whole life all of a sudden started taking a back seat. You see? Now, we all know what investments are. This is what the Wall Street sector specializes in. Investments. Investments, you can lose your entire principal with investments. It's risk. Well, these other policies carry the same kind of more or less risk because they're market-sensitive policies, you see. Whereas with the whole life product, you've already heard Robert say, is the life insurance company is more or less protecting the product. You know, they're more or less on the hook, you know, with those cash values. Not so when individuals buy some of these other policies, the responsibility and puts the consumer more on the hook. Investments, we know, are stocks, bonds, mutual funds. These are the underlying assets of qualified plans. You know, most of your 401ks, your 403bs, IRAs, the underlying investments is in the stock market, you see, and there's risk involved. And they refer to them as retirement plans. You can save up for your retirement. We've already seen the results of that. The commercial banking sector, it specializes in loans. We've already mentioned that a couple of times. And they're a part of the Federal Reserve System and they are involved in the expansion and contraction of credit in the economy when it's manipulated and controlled by our central bank. In 2015, it's important for you to know that in the life insurance sector, there are approximately 1,000 life insurance companies. These 1,000 companies are made up of either stock companies or mutual companies or mutual holding companies. Most of them are stock companies. In a stock company, the dividends are paid to the stockholders. In a mutual company, the dividends are paid to the policy owners. The big difference between the two is ownership. Stockholders own the stock company. Policy owners own the mutual company. Big difference in why we stress working with mutuals. Together, the mutuals and the stock companies make up the 1,000 that exist today. It's important to realize that only about 50 of these 1,000 companies even carry the dividend-paying whole life product. And out of these 50, it's mostly the mutuals. 20, 25, 30 of them are the mutual companies, and they do have the dividend-paying whole life policy. Don't let that frighten you too much. It's always been lopsided that way. There's always been more stock companies than mutuals, always. I want to mention one other thing that's important for you to know is that there is a strategy that the financial services industry more or less follows. It's not written in stone. They don't get together and say, this is our strategy. But if you examine how they work and have worked for many years, and this includes the insurance sector, their strategy is based on the accumulation of money. What I mean here is they want us to send them their premium payments, payments for all the Wall Street investments. The bank also has financial products. They want our deposits. It's all about, we'll take care of the money. You let us manage it. Just Let us handle it. All right? And they kind of get a little upset if you try to take some of it out. Today, it can be difficult to even take like a $10,000 check out of a commercial bank without them asking you all kinds of questions. Now, the difference is that IBC, you see, is not focused on the utilization of money, accumulation of money, but rather the utilization of money. Now, you do have to go through a process of accumulating, but the focus of IBC is on the utilization of the money. For what reason? For all the kinds of things that come up in everyday living. We all have to use cars. When our daughter grows up and she's going to get married, we got to pay for that. That can be very expensive. When we have a home repair that costs a lot of money, we need a pool of money to go to take it out. College education, there's all kinds of reasons that happen to us as we age and go through life. Our need for these things is great. IBC is Nelson is trying to show you that IBC is to make use of the IBC policies to deal with these things, because what is happening and has been happening is they're taking our money and they're putting it in prison where we can't touch it without paying penalties and tax and can't take it out till we're old people. But all these needs are coming up while we're bringing up our families, and what people are doing is they're putting it on a credit card. And some of these credit cards, have really high interest rates. They get more and deeper in debt. They're taking out bank loans to buy these things or going to finance companies. You see, IBC is to deal with this, even the elimination of debt. Sit down with an authorized practitioner and show you how to do that. There's a lot of people that are in deep debt right now. The IBC strategy can help you come out of that. With IBC, the policy owner's control of his money provides him superior cash flow management. And the special loan terms are like, you don't find these anywhere else. They're very, very flexible, and it allows for tax planning options at retirement time or passive income time. So you see, once we understand that IBC is really about a completely different warehouse for our cash. That's what it's about, a different warehouse. That it's mostly about financing our big ticket purchase items of life, so that the focus is more on the cash value of these policies rather than the death benefit. Even though, as Nelson says clearly in his book, you're going to have so much death benefit that you're going to have a hard time getting it through the underwriters. It's not like you're going to not have it. So we realize that we're actually managing our cash flow or banking with an insurance policy, if you will. The policy is not literally a bank, but we are using a specially designed dividend-paying whole life insurance contract to practice a form of privatized banking. The Nelson Nash Institute and all of its authorized IBC practitioners are on a mission to tell this to the entire nation. Now, we don't expect to convert the whole nation, of course, but we really think we can reach 10% of the people. This is a powerful message that they all need to hear because it will help them. And they expect to do it one individual at a time. Once the individual gets one of these, he immediately sees that it benefits his own personal economy, and he's going to wind up telling someone else, his family member, his a friend. So it has a way of spreading all on its own. But authorized IBC practitioners feel that they've got to get that ball rolling and tell people about this. It is a solution in which one individual can actually make a difference in an economy that's gone terribly awry. And the solution's only requirement is that the action of that single person who's really acting only in a manner to help himself or herself, that's all they're doing, but in so acting, ultimately that person helps all of society, simply because when you go to the insurance sector for your loans, you are dampening or mitigating inflation. Life insurance companies cannot inflate the money supply and create more of the same hazard that we've seen the Federal Reserves and commercial banks do. So the more of us that do this, the more we actually have an effect on not necessarily killing the beast, but starving him to death. The problem in all of this mess has been Keynesian economics. When John Maynard Keynes wrote his famous book in 1936, folks, it took the world by storm. Now, you have to remember the world was in a deep depression. This is the message that governments were waiting for central banks were waiting for. This man believed and advocated deficit spending. If you ever wonder why we have such enormous national debt, Keynesian economics. Furthermore, he said you don't have to pay him back. In the end, we're all dead anyway, he said. Now, central bankers, governments, this is the message that they believe. And these are brilliant people. Every university that teaches economics today, from Harvard all the way down to the smallest community college, is vested in this kind of teaching and thinking. This is what I learned in school coming up. Keynesian economics. Did not know the difference. Every time we take out a loan from a commercial bank, Americans unknowingly are contributing to the inflation problem. So we need to become part of the solution and not the problem. The solution is in the action of moving our money, redirecting our cash flows out of wherever we have them to where they really do some good, moving them out of the volatile Wall Street commercial bank nexus and into the conservative, safe insurance sector and into a specially designed IBC policy. This is the depth of IBC. This is the goal, the bigger goal of IBC. Authorized practitioners, when they go through our course, are not taught Keynesian economics, but rather Austrian economics. So they become beginning students of Austrian economics. Austrian economics is completely different from Keynesian economics. It believes in the sanctity of private property, believes in human choice and value. Austrians don't see themselves as some sort of formula that central planners from above can sort of put us in and make calculations in the aggregate. We all act as individuals. These are some of the beginning principles of what Austrian economics is all about. I speak of it because this is the heritage of the founder of IBC. He has said earlier today, He's been a student of Austrian economics for 54 years, so there's a long tradition here. The Austrian school predates the Keynesian school of economics. In fact, it goes all the way back to the 1500s, Salamanca, Spain. It gravitated to Austria, when the man in the center with the beard wrote his book, The Principles of Economics, Karl Menger. And when he wrote that book, that's when it first was called the Austrian school. He taught the man underneath him to his left, that's Ludwig von Mises, that's one of his students. The man to his right, von Bauwerk, is also a student of Menger. These guys were Austrian. But today, the Austrian school, by the way, is not a place. It's a way of thinking. And it resides mostly in the United States. We have, many Austrian economists today in universities and schools, and the Austrian message is going out to the rest of the world. The man at the bottom to Mises is F.A. Hayek, who won the Nobel Prize in 1978 for the Mises-Hayek business cycle theory. This is how it is that Austrians know when the next crash is coming. They can pin it precisely. They were the only ones that knew that the 2008 crisis was coming. It's only because of the work of these two men. I need to mention this man because he happens to be Nelson Nash's mentor, Leonard Read. Nelson was a young man when he met him, but Leonard Read was an Austrian that started an educational institute 60 years ago to fight against the onslaught of what he saw happening in the United States, and wanted to return things back to free market principles. Socialization was just sweeping over the country, and he wanted a way to stop it, and he felt the only way he could do it is through education. So he formed this educational institute and literally spawned hundreds of others. Now we have an educational institute of the Austrian school down in Auburn, Alabama, the Mises Institute. We have the Independent Institute out in San Francisco. We have the Acton Institute up in Michigan, the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. These institutes continue to educate, spreading the Austrian message. Bob and I are trying to educate them about IBC so we can somehow come together and create that 10% synergy that we're looking for. This is another great Austrian, Henry Hazlitt. He wrote probably one of the best economic books, Economics in One Lesson. This gentleman right here, I guess, needs no introduction, an Austrian as well. He probably taught more Americans what Austrian economics was more or less about, but he was doing it from the top down, see, because he was a congressman, he was a doctor, a congressman, ran for president, but he did do a lot of teaching, just in the way he talked, the way he communicated, the way he tried to steer the country away from what he thought was bad monetary policy. And then, of course, our own Nelson Nash. And as I said, both Ron Paul and Nelson are mentees of Leonard Read. And so they are just simply carrying on the tradition. Nelson is now 84, but he's out here still trying to spread the message along with his IBC, which, by the way, he's doing it from the bottom up and out. Just the reverse of Ron Paul, from the bottom up and out, one individual at a time. So I want to close this workshop with a story. It comes from Nelson Nash's favorite author. The story's a little religious because you have to understand this man was not only a great Austrian thinker, but he was also a priest. And that more or less explains why the stories are somewhat religious. But there's a point at the end that I think that the Nelson Nash Institute would like to leave you with before you leave today. So the story that, that Knock tells is about what opens up in the book of Isaiah. I think it's the 6th chapter there of the book. And it begins with this quote. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, he says. Now, that King Uzziah, he was an interesting king because he reigned for half a century, and that was really quite unusual for that period of time. In other words, he had a great economy, and but somewhere along the line, he got some bad people in his cabinet. They started leading the people astray. And all of a sudden, there toward the end, it just sort of petered out and died. So in the year that this king died, the Lord paid a visit to the prophet Isaiah. And he said to him, Isaiah, I want you to go out into the marketplace, the byways and highways, and I want you to warn the people. I want you to tell them that what they're doing is wrong. I want you to tell them why it's wrong. And I want you to tell them that they need to stop what they're doing or they're going to suffer the consequences. And Isaiah, I don't want you to mince any words. I want you to give it to them good and strong, and then I want you to keep on giving it to them. And oh, by the way, I think I ought to also tell you this, Isaiah. It isn't going to work. It's not going to work. The big shots are going to turn up their noses at you, and the masses, forget about it. They won't even listen. Those were the marching orders that the Lord gave Isaiah. Now, I ask you something. Would you take on an assignment like that? You know, if you knew that it wasn't going to work to begin with, would you even attempt it? Now, believe it or not, that's the same marching orders that the Lord gave the prophet Jonah. You know, that's the one that got swallowed up by the fish, right? Now, the only difference with Jonah is that he just told God he flat wouldn't do it. And he went off and hid. And what about Elijah? Same thing, same orders. Now, the difference with Elijah is not, he didn't go hide because he was a coward. I mean, they were really coming to get him. They were trying to kill him. And he ran far away into the desert. And by the time the Lord caught up with him, Elijah, what are you doing? What are you doing way out here? Didn't I tell you to go warn the people? And Elijah, trembling, he says, Lord, you don't understand. I just barely got out by the skin of my teeth. They were coming to kill me. No one, Lord, believes our message. And if they kill me, who's going to be left to speak it? And it says there that the Lord said, no, Elijah, no. There is a remnant, and they're waiting for you, and they will listen. And ladies and gentlemen, we of the Nelson Nash Institute believe that 10% is the remnant. And this is why we do what we do.